Hi everybody and welcome to this year's Year 5 Maths workshop. Through the workshop we're just going to go through expectations of Year 5, how we build up addition, subtraction, multiplication and division, and some examples of a lesson flow so you can see what we do at school. So the main aims of this workshop are to help you understand the age-related expectations in maths, understand how maths journeys take place during a maths lesson and how we cover national curricular objectives, and finally to help you understand how to support your child at home with maths. So to begin with, here's just a look at some of the end of year expectations for children in Year 5. Essentially, by Year 5, what we're doing is we're building on what has been taught lower down the school, but using increasingly larger numbers and introducing decimals. If you follow the link on the screen, you'll be able to see all the expectations for all areas of maths by the end of Year 5, and anything in green is something new to that year group. Everything we do now in Year 5 is with the expectation of getting them ready for Year 6 so they can revise things ready for SATs. So you'll see from this little table on your screen everything that's needed for children to meet the expected standard by the end of Year 6, so the end of Key Stage 2. You'll notice it's using all 4 operations, using formal methods, maybe introducing decimals in the context of money, and looking at fractions, decimals and percentages and their equivalents. So when it comes to teaching maths, we always start with place value. Place value is so critical around all areas of the maths curriculum. It's the value of each digit. For example, 582 is made up of 500, 80 and 2. As children get higher up the school, what we find is that when we start to talk about 100,000 and millions, that actually children struggle to understand how big that actually is. So we do lots of practical things to help children understand the concept of place value. However, I think the most important thing for you to know as parents around place value is that we never add zeros, maybe when we're multiplying and dividing by 10, 100 or 1,000, and the decimal point never ever moves. It's a fixed place on the place value chart. So in the next series of slides, I'm going to talk to you about the 4 operations, so addition, subtraction, multiplication and division, and how we build up those concepts as we go through. You'll see that we do it the same way for every concept, it's just the operation that has changed. So starting with addition, you'll see each time that we build up from a concrete method to a pictorial method to an abstract method. So concrete is usually practical, using counters maybe on a table to show how we're adding and regrouping before moving on to representing that in pictures, and finally a formal method which you can see there as the abstract method for addition on the end. It's really important that we go through each of these stages when we're doing each operation or each new theme in maths, as it helps children build their understanding and to really master that area of the curriculum. As part of our maths curriculum, we also make sure that we use a range of ways to ask children how to add or whatever operation that they're doing. So if you look on the screen now, you'll see conceptual variation, different ways to ask children to add. So we might use part-whole diagrams, which is the first visual with the circles there. We might ask it as a word problem. We might give it to them with place value counters or as a table. And this just really helps build up the mastery towards that operation. We also make sure that we expose the children to the different vocabulary that also means addition. So for example, you'll see at the bottom there some addition vocabulary. So as well as can you add, we might say more, total, make, plus, sum. It's also really important to note at this point that sum means adding and not can you do a maths sum, which a lot of children can sometimes get confused about. So once we've done with addition and we've mastered that, we move on to subtraction. And again, you'll see that we build up in concrete, pictorial and abstract ways. So we're using place value counters on the table before getting children to show in pictures. And then finally, using the compact method of subtraction to subtract 2 numbers. Again, we ask children to subtract in lots of different ways, and on the screen you'll see lots of different ways to ask children to solve 391, take away 186. As with addition as well, we also introduce lots of different vocabulary. So we have subtract, leave, take away, minus, difference between, and all those words mean the same thing. Here are just some examples for how we build up the concrete, pictorial and abstract methods for multiplication. So you'll see 6 times 23 in the first column with counters, then you can see 6 times 23 as pictures, before seeing 6 times 23 as abstract method with a formal written method. Again, just like with addition and subtraction, it's really important that we show children lots of different ways to solve multiplication questions. So on here, you can see lots of different ways we might ask the children to solve the question 6 times 23. And underneath, you'll be able to see lots of different vocabulary that means multiplication or to multiply. So here you'll see how we build up division lower down the school, particularly down in Key Stage 1 and Year 3 and 4. We often talk about dividing as sharing groups. So you'll see here there's some bean bags, they've been shared into groups of 2. We then look at how we can do it as a bar model and show equal parts for 6 divided by 2 to show that that equals 3. However, up in Year 5 and 6, we introduce children to the bus stop method for the first time, and we divide increasingly larger numbers, usually 3 or 4 digit numbers. You can see here we've started with place value counters and how that divides that way into the equal groups before showing pictorially, and finally using the bus stop method as a compact method to divide a number in a arithmetic test. And just like before, you can see here lots of different ways we might ask children to show how to divide 615 by 5. And just like all the other slides as well, there is some division vocabulary underneath, so you know what type of words children might be exposed to when asking to divide, such as share, divide, equal groups of. Just like last year, mental arithmetic and times tables are still a really key focus for Highwood this year. At the end of Key Stage 2, all our children will sit a mental arithmetic SATs paper, which will explore the 4 operations, times tables, fractions, number bonds, adding and subtracting mentally. So we really spend a good chunk of time each day looking at those skills to help children become fluent in them. So how is maths taught at Highwood? At Highwood we use a scheme called AET, which helps us create what we call a mastery flow, where children get to work through all 3 methods, so the concrete method, pictorial and the abstract methods of doing each operation or concept in maths. So we have a show part of the lesson, which is all practical, and the concrete part. We have do, which is fluency, before moving on to explain and solve. So this is a lesson flow for the concept of factors, and we use counters to make arrays to find the factors of a number and then created definitions. So we use that concrete visual element of learning. So in the pictures you'll see that this child made arrays of the number 16. So the green counters have 4 rows of 4 because 4 times 4 is 16, so 4 must be a factor of 16. And we also have 2 rows of 8 because 8 and 2 are also factors. So after we've mastered the show part of the lesson and children are really beginning to understand what a factor is, we move on to the do part of the lesson, which is the fluency. So here you'll see some fluency questions that I gave the children this year around factors. I built in that pictorial method, which you can see with the blue squares for making the arrays to find different factors, but also brought in the abstract way with the other 2 questions on the screen. So essentially at this stage, children are only practicing that one key skill in the most straightforward way that we can give it to them. Once children have mastered the do part and we know that they are fluent in that skill, they move on to the think part of the lesson. And the think part of the lesson is still only looking at that one skill, so this time factors, but they might be asked to look for mistakes in other children's work or prove how something could be true. Always, sometimes never questions. So they're problem solving questions, but just around that one key skill. Then, once children have mastered that fluency at a think level of being able to explain and justify and reason with that skill, we move on to explore. And explore looks at the key objective from that lesson, so in this context factors, but brings in previous learning. So you'll see that there are some Venn diagrams on the screen, or I've asked the children to think of even numbers, less than and doubles. This just really helps cement the children's learning of this concept, but also show it to them in different contexts and in different ways. It's mainly a lot of problem solving, reasoning and justifying, just like it is in the think part of the lesson. But again, we brought in those previous skills that we've learned in other lessons. And finally, some lessons might have a solve aspect to it. Solve doesn't happen in every lesson, maybe every couple of lessons, or there could be one solve for the week. And solve is a question where children look at it and they're not really sure where to start. There's maybe not a clear beginning or a clear ending, or maybe they've got to use a range of different skills from a range of different lessons to solve a question. So here is a solve that we did on. So this is a solve that we had that was using the learning of square numbers, but also brought in finding odd numbers, the sum of digits, finding more than one number, and children had to really sit down and unpick the clues that they had in order to find the 3 numbers that would open the door for the international spy. Finally, I just wanted to touch on how you can help with maths at home. So for me, the biggest thing that you can do at home is keep practicing those number bonds and those times tables. Times tables comes into so many elements of the curriculum, fractions, into decimals, into division, and it's just really important that they're secure. By year 5, a lot of children actually know their times table, so now it's about learning those division facts just as quickly. So we know straight away 2 times 3 is 6, but do we know that 6 divided by 3 is 2, and vice versa? You can also use times table rock stars at home. It's always fun in the wider world to do a little bit of real life adding or subtraction. And finally, all children have access to mathematics to help build on skills that they've been learning at school. As always, if you need any help or have any questions, my door is always open and I'm always happy to hear from you. Or if you can't get to me, always feel free to email the Year 5 email address. Have a nice evening and hopefully this helps.